You're listening to ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio, with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. This episode is brought to you by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 80 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. And KingswaySoft now works with Common Data Service and Power Apps. We thank KingswaySoft for sponsoring ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. Welcome to ProdCast. We are joined with MVP Marius Agur, who also is known as the CRM Viking. How are you doing, Marius?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you?
And of course, we have Matthew Anderson here as well. And Marius, you have the honor of being our first guest on ProdCast. So that's quite the honor.
Oh, really?
So none of the other guests want to be productive, I guess. So what you came to me with as an idea, which I thought was great, was talking about being that both Marius and I are MVPs. We're always looking to do community contributions, and what I mean by that is things that we're not paid for, and things that help the community, help people in the community. But that's how we became MVPs, is by contributing to the community. But whether you work in the dynamics world or something else, one of the things that adds richness to your life is contributing things outside of your work. But how do you find time to do that? How do you do it in a productive way without it consuming your life? So Marius, how do you approach your community activities?
So that's been a big issue for me lately because I had a daughter almost 5 months ago, which feels both like 5 years and 5 days. So,
congratulations!
Oh, thank you.
Matthew knows what that's like.
Yeah, so it's our first one, so everything is new, and everything is exciting and horrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
So my biggest issue nowadays is just finding time to do stuff and figuring out what I want to do.
So is it that having the child has changed your normal schedule before, and that's what children do, is they kind of reset your schedule. What did you do before before your daughter arrived, and how has that changed?
Before my daughter was born, it was much easier just to let my fiance set a date where she would do something with one of her friends or whatever, or just need some time away from me, which is understandable. And then I would spend some time doing community work, and that would be awesome and fun. And all of a sudden, there's a new person here who makes all my spare time much more valuable.
Right.
So when I could just set aside 5 hours and sit coding, writing a blog post, or just sitting late 2 hours every day at work, now all of a sudden I want to get home the very minute I'm done, just to be with her and
right.
Actually see her a couple of hours before she goes to sleep.
Well, Matthew, you are much closer to this since you're on your second child now, but just had a baby in your house, and it's been a decade since my last child was born. So my advice might be a little outdated. But Matthew, you're still doing podcasts along with being a TS for Microsoft. How would you find time to fit in things in the crazy schedule with the babies?
Yeah, so it's a combination of kind of some early preparedness. So when I find that time, I can take advantage, and then being very very pointed about being aware of when I can have that time. So on the preparation side, some of the larger practices that I would have. I mean, before I was at Microsoft, I was aiming to become an MVP and was very involved in building out content, kind of public content more so than I have been of late. But when my daughter was born, I had to scale back some of the grandiose plans I had for those. I'd have these ideas for a 6-part series of something I was going to do before, and all of a sudden it's like, well, if I set out trying to do a 6-part series, I'm never going to find all the time to cohesively get the overall arc of that, and then pull the structure together in any kind of reasonably timed content that's coming out. So the different direction I went with that is what can I do in bite-sized chunks that's still going to be meaningful for people, and kind of decide what those things are going to be. And then I spent a lot more late nights and early mornings after either dealing with a kid that woke up and had to be put back to sleep, or maybe she was sitting in her little bouncer and I was sitting there tapping away at the keys working on something. But those were the couple of the ways that I would stay on top of things.
Yeah, one thing I think when I became an MVP, it was shortly after my daughter was born, before my son was born. And I think I actually used that to my advantage to keep up my community contribution level. It changed it, though. And what I would do is I'd volunteer to get up and change the baby at 4 o'clock in the morning. And in doing that, after I changed the baby and gave her a bottle, I would type a blog post. And that was some of my most productive time. But it changed it. And what I learned was, don't look at your community contribution as separate from your normal job, because then it's just, I have to do this other thing. Find a way to bring it into what you do, meaning a lot of my blog posts and CRM Tip of the Day came from actual challenges that I came across in projects. So when I would have a project that had a problem or had to find a solution for something, you're naturally documenting that stuff to, email your customer or document what you did. You can easily take that, genericize it a little bit, and make content from it. Same thing I would say from like presentations at your CRMUG chapter. It's hard to find time to put those presentations together if it's something totally separate from what you're doing. But if you pick topics in line with the kind of projects and the kind of work that you do, you can kind of find a way to, for example, you're going to be taking some screenshots in an environment to make a training guide for a customer. You don't want to show their environment on your CRMUG slides, but you do it in a way that's generic enough so that you can remove obvious things about their specific scenario and build that content that way. And that's some of the things I did.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I wanted to do. The only issue is that I don't really have a lot of customer projects where there's something interesting to write about. It's kind of like, well, I'm at my 5th customer now where I'm doing the same thing I blogged about a year ago. So I'm going to. I thought it was a 1-part mini-series, but now it's a 10-part
This is the 25th segment of Marius's blog post.
Yeah. So actually, a lot of the things I've been working with for the last year has been authentication issues of one kind of or another. So I'm actually having an XRM virtual explaining how I did everything wrong for a whole year. So that's basically what I got from my work that I can provide to the community.
And you can't even blame it on lack of sleep from having the kid.
No, I can't blame anything on the kid. Like, she goes to bed at around 7 p.m. and then she wakes up between 6 and 8.
Right.
So we are so lucky that people will hate me for saying this on the podcast.
Well, I guess another thing that I think might be helpful, and this is kind of like what we did for this podcast this morning, schedule a time. And so schedule a meeting with yourself, even if it's 1 hour a week or whatever, to have at least that to focus on some community. That way it doesn't get out of hand in your priorities. You can still keep your priorities, but if you can schedule a time, an hour, hour and a half, or 15 minutes every morning or something, minimal amount of time where you can still get in the focus mode, maybe going with the Pomodoro thing and doing 25-minute segment for, focused on that in that way. And then pair that up with either like a OneNote notebook or a scratch pad where when the ideas come to you, which are usually sometime other than that scheduled time, you jot them down. And that way you don't lose them. And when that focus time comes to do that, that way you can do it while maintaining the appropriate priorities in your life.
Yeah, so that's the exact kind of thinking I have as well. But I'm doing a lot of technical things usually, so it takes a certain amount of time to get anything meaningful done. So what I feel is like 30 minutes, that's the least amount of time I need to do something meaningful for a technical contribution. And 30 minutes, it doesn't start from the moment you sit down. It's usually like maybe 5 or 10 minutes because you have some emails you can't ignore, or there's a notification you haven't read, or maybe check your phone if you got some messages or whatever. You just have to. So I try to set aside like 45 minutes to an hour, and then just accept that for this amount of time I'm going to be sitting down and actually doing some of the community work that I've been planning to do. So it's like kind of like accepting that there's a cost and actually paying it. And hopefully it doesn't feel like that for you if you're doing community work. In that case, I suggest you stop, because you shouldn't do community work for out of a sense of depth, or it has to be purposeful to you. So if you're doing it to become an MVP, then we have the old saying, if you try to become an MVP, you will never become one. And if it's not fun, then don't do it. You can do so many other things instead.
Absolutely. It becomes a second job for you.
That actually ties kind of into what you want to do as a community contribution. So I think a lot of people are looking for like topics or technologies that aren't there aren't many blogs about it, or there isn't much information, and trying to find out like what can I pick which will make a giant footprint in the blogosphere or whatever. And that kind of approach will just burn you out, because if you're going to work with something that's free and you don't get anything in return, it should be something that engages you, something that you are looking forward to working with. Like if you don't get to work with that community contribution that day, you feel like you're missing out. Like that's the thing you should be working on.
I think that's a great way to characterize that. Just kind of spinning it back, having the contribution to the community, whether it's free or otherwise, be something where you're not thinking about the reward that you're going to get from it. The reward is intrinsic in and of itself, of doing the thing. You had fun, and you're sharing it with others. And oh, by the way, it helps out the community as well.
Absolutely. And some of that's different if you're self-employed versus working for somebody else. I think if you are an employee of somebody else, you want to make sure that they don't get the impression like I'm taking all this time away from you. But what I would tell you is make the case with your boss that by doing this, I'm going to be better at doing what I do. This isn't just me doing something else on the side, and taking away from work hours. This is me researching other technologies, getting better at them, giving guidance to our company on how we can be better and make better use of these technologies as well. And the most successful companies and Microsoft partners out there have seen the value that somebody that's involved in the community can bring, because they're the best advertisement you have for your company.
So about that finding the thing that you want to do. It's important that you don't throw it away because other people are doing it. Like if you see something that maybe Jason Latimer was working on, then that doesn't mean, okay, Jason did that, like that's the one source of truth,
Right.
even though that's often the case. You can use that as research. So that means, well, you have the best starting point that you could possibly have. Now reiterate over what somebody else did and see how can you expand it, how can you make it more available for everyone. Is there any way you can take this hardcore code in and make it into something that a BA
Right.
can use?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and there's different ways that people are going to learn things. There's certainly, especially when you get into technical content and you're going through that detail, every time I, follow kind of instructions that are posted out to a blog, as I'm going through it, find myself saying, well, why did they do that? Or, I would have done it this way, or, something they seem to have skipped 2 or 3 steps that have me hung up because I didn't know there were those implied 2 or 3 steps that are in there. And sometimes having the blog that fills in some of those gaps or offers another angle on, accomplishing the same task can be really good for the community. I mean, it keeps people thinking more flexibly and not just not that you have to reinvent the wheel every time, but you also have to say, is this the type of wheel that I want to have on this vehicle?
In a way, doing something technical is maybe the easiest thing you can do because it's just what's coming in Dynamics. Go find that slide and just pick something. If anything there is interesting to you, then you have something to work with. And what I found, because I'm running my own company, or freelancing as it's most commonly known, is that talking about or writing about your own processes or the processes you want to implement at a customer is much harder to find out how do you angle it, how do you transform that into something others can learn from without telling them what another customer is doing or suddenly revealing a business critical
Right.
process for competitors, etc. So if you like technical stuff, then just congratulations.
Well,
you
I
won
would
the
say
lottery.
it's easy to find technical topics, especially if you understand it, but not everybody does it well. And I don't know if you've seen this cartoon by Van Octop called How to Draw a Horse, where it goes step by step how to draw a horse, and it starts steps 1 through 4. It's very cartoonish, and then step 5 is a photorealistic horse, and that's kind of like how people do technical topics. And I have been especially appreciative of this by recently learning or going deeper into Canvas apps, because there's a lot of content on YouTube that people have recorded that really doesn't do a good job of it. It goes into it, but then it assumes you already know certain things, or does it in a way that is not really instructive for somebody who is maybe more of a newbie. And it's kind of a hard thing to do. Is how do you appeal to the people who are somewhat more proficient with the technology while still not totally tuning out people who maybe aren't and are working to get there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what everyone who starts to code realizes, is that you find examples and you find guides and just like, well, I'm missing most of the knowledge on how to even get to the starting point here. And what I found several times is researching it is that when I finally get in touch with the guy who made it, it's just like, oh, no, I found something on SourceForge, so I just copied it.
Yeah, and the other part with that though too is, the people who do technical topics really well don't just talk about what you can do, but why you should do it and why it matters. So I coach people I mentor that when you write content, don't just be breaking news. Here's this new feature. Answer the question, why should I care about it? And why does that matter? And that's one way you can spin. You can spin that. You talked about the thing.
Well,
you're doing 5 different posts on the same topic. You can take this one topic, which you blogged about before, but why does this matter to the banking industry? Why does this matter to CRM administrators? You can spin the same topic and have good, non-repetitive content about similar topics, which I think we've illustrated here on CRM Audio with almost a podcast every day about Microsoft Business applications.
If you have a mind for it, then as you said, you find a topic and you can probably do 10 different implementations of that, whatever that should be. Like how many different things can you use business processes for? When it comes to community work, it's all about that thing, but it should be fun too, and it should be meaningful, and you should do it because you want to, and don't just throw it away because somebody else is doing it, or you don't see how others could benefit from it. Like if you go and check out again, technical topic, but if you check out XrmToolBox, you'll find a bunch of different plugins that people made just because it was useful at one customer, and then they decided to just make a XrmToolBox plugin, and all of a sudden they have hundreds or thousands of people relying on their tool.
Given you're in Norway and smaller country than where Matthew and I are, how much like commuting time do you have to when you go to your customer? How long does it take you to get to your customers' locations?
So the one I'm working with mostly now is about an hour on the train plus hour 50 minutes, and then
so is the train time sometime you can use to work on your community contributions or blog posts?
Not for me, because I actually can do customer work while I'm on the train. So as an independent consultant, I just sit down on the train and I put on my noise cancellation headset, and then I'm at work. So yeah, so for me it's really about that, setting the time to get it done, and well, setting the time to get to do it, not get it done, but to actually get some time to spend on something you want to do. So, like, for example, I'm writing my first XrmToolBox plugin now, and then I've spent a huge, I haven't spent much time, but I've spent many days on it, and it has not come very far. And for me, it's like every day I hope I hope I can get like 20, 30 minutes just to bang out a few more details in that plugin, and maybe I can get some time researching how to do Windows forms, because I wasn't born in the 60s.
So on that, before. And again, you're still working on it, so I'm not asking you to reveal what it is, but is this coming from a scenario or something you've used with one of your customers before, or is this just something new that you have come up with?
Well, this is actually something that will be really useful at the customer I'm with now. So I'm making it because I have an actual business case, and that makes it much more easy because I know what functionality I would like to have in it. So saying I want to do X, and here is how I do X. That's just that could be a really cool technical thing, but it could also have zero business value. So for me, it helps a lot to anchor it in a real-world scenario. But that doesn't have to be the case for everyone. If you just want to make cool things that looks awesome and passes every unit test in the world, then go ahead, do that. It's just, for me, it really helps to tie it into more than just this was technically difficult. I want to see how this brings value as well.
Okay. So when you're doing that, are you focusing all your community contribution time on that thing now, or are you still writing blog posts and other things, forums and other contributions?
No, so I'm trying to focus on that, and the issue is that my brain goes, oh, this looks cool, maybe check out that for a bit, maybe watch that video, maybe read what somebody else did and so on. So I think I distract myself a bit too much. But no, I try to focus on one thing at a time. So when I do the whole OneNote thing to just write down something that I thought of and this would be cool to do later, I try to make sure that I don't put it in where I have stuff I'm working on right now. So maybe I think of some cool topics that I don't get to work with, and then I bring them out like a year later, and it's not really interesting anymore. The features have been deprecated or whatever, and then, well, okay, but at least I didn't spend any more time on it, and it was a cool idea. But I think it's better to work on the stuff you are engaged with right now than trying to bite over too much.
So we won't be seeing Marius's guide to the email router.
Oh, now you're just angering me. Yeah, no, I could do a whole session or maybe 10 on the email router. I've spent too much time with it, but yeah, basically you won't find me writing a blog post about the email router at the same time as I'm working on stuff for XRM Virtual and writing a plugin and etc. So I made sure to complete my presentation for XRM Virtual before I started working on the plugin. So that way I'm not sitting the whole week just thinking, oh, I wish I had more time to work on this plugin I want to make, but I have to write this.
Yeah, I'm not the best one to ask
instead.
for tips on how to pace yourself, because like October has been really hectic because I spoke at Ignite and did 3 sessions at CRMG Summit. In hindsight, that was probably a little bit too much to do. I made it through alive, but
yeah, but did you secretly know, Joel, but you were like, I can power through it, or did it catch you by surprise?
Selected for everything I submitted. You know, I thought I would like submit for like multiple things, and law of averages get 2 of them, and instead I get 5.
Right, and you aren't exactly known for sleeping a lot, so there wasn't much time to
exactly. So, and I mean, but that's another good point, though. If there's things that you could do from your XrmToolBox work that could generate a blog post, or when you finish it, you could get a blog, at least a couple blog posts out of it about how to use the tool, speak at a user group or XRM virtual session about the tool and the challenges, and that probably can, give the multiplier effect. That's what I see people who are MVPs are good at doing that. Not necessarily rehashing the same content over and over, but taking one thing can lead to another. You record a podcast, you can write a follow-up blog post about it. There's a lot of ways to spin this to be adding value in a big way and multiplying your efforts.
Basically, by doing one thing, there's just so much around it that if you're looking for content, you will find it. So I don't think the whole finding content or knowing what to do is the hard part here. The hard part is figuring out what you actually want to do and when you can get the time for it. And there's so many possibilities to present it or share with the community. Like technical stuff is just, XrmToolBox is probably the biggest one. And you have GitHub and you have the Dynamics community. And if you do things that aren't as technical, then you have CRM UG, you have XRM Virtual, you have CRM Audio, if you've heard about that podcast. So there's the platforms and the possibilities to share and contribute to the community is there. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to find those platforms on Google. So I think if you want to get into community work, it's basically just figuring out what you want to do
Right.
and how
And
you
figure out
get the time to do it.
why you want to do it too.
I was going to tag onto that sometimes, especially if you're just getting started, because I chat with a lot of people who are going to be doing their first blog post or guesting on their first podcast. And, one of the blockers that seems to come up again and again is they'll have a topic, they like it, but there's this fear that maybe no one else is going to be interested in it. Maybe everyone's going to laugh at that topic or say, everyone's done that topic. But I really encourage those folks just to go for it. Because what's surprising is, as you get it out there, you learn both about yourself, how much you really did like that topic, and then or not, and then you also see from a community perspective that there's always someone who goes out there and likes that blog post that you have, and someone else who has a follow-up question, and then it ends up getting linked somewhere, even if it's a someone who's fairly new to blogging. So just being okay with some of that discomfort in that topic early on can be really helpful in getting through.
Yeah, and also like blogging, it's like most other things, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So even though it feels like I'm finishing this blog post and then posting it, and then I'm done with it, that's usually not the case. Like I've done a lot. No, I've done quite a few, but not a lot of blog posts, and I've done some pretty nitty-gritty stuff with the SDK and authentication and whatever. But the one blog post I have that is the most read and still is the most read is installing Dynamics CRM 2016. And it didn't seem like a very interesting or useful post, but it was one of the first one I made on this blog, because I decided like I need to get some content fast. So I think I made 10 blog posts in 10 days. And turns out that installing CRM 2016, according to the best practices, that's what people wonder about the most.
A good barometer of if it would be a good blog post topic is if you search for Google and Bing or whatever your search engine is, and you can't find that specific answer, that specific scenario, that's a pretty good indication, especially if you're asking that question, like, how do I do this? Once you figure out how to do it, just document the simple steps and put it up there, and there's bound to be other people who are searching for that. And so I think we have I talked about the curse of knowledge, how people who are really technical sometimes can't communicate to the people who aren't. But sometimes on the opposite side, you're learning something new and you think, oh, I'm not an expert at this. What if they ask me a question about it? I don't know enough about to do that. But a lot of times you shortcut or you sell yourself short, because it's a lot of that is if you just write down what you learn as you learn it and put it into a meaningful blog post, that's very helpful to people who are a little bit more junior than you are, but maybe don't know it all. So don't assume. And this was one of my biggest things when I became an MVP 11 years ago. I was a little bit intimidated seeing people who were people like you, Marius, who were developers who could write these utilities, very deep technically. What I found is I knew more about the Outlook client than almost any of them, just by using it and being in a job where I actually used it versus people who were more developer types. So that shows that there's room for all different types. And if you think, oh, I don't fit that mold, that's a good thing, because that means that you have a unique perspective to bring. And I would bring up Matthew and Britta's Implement This podcast, where we have a lot of other shows that talk about the cutting edge and what's new and the Power Platform, and they do things that mentions the Power Platform, but also talks about things like cascading behavior with relationships. And that's something that nobody's really talking that much about, but something that still is very important and very meaningful, especially if you get that behavior wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing you're talking
Right.
about, like the imposter syndrome, like how, like, who am I compared to these monsters
Right.
of technical expertise. And what's kind of funny is that I have it kind of the opposite way. So whenever somebody posts something with like brilliant business insights or like seeing the usefulness in the platform, which I didn't even consider, it's like, how am I going to survive in this business when I can't think like that? Like, how will anyone ever want to recruit me if I
or
can't
or
think like
or
Steve
or,
Mordu?
or Juka, who can like look at a new form and work out the 5-year Microsoft strategy on something somehow. I don't know how he does it.
No, Yuka has a magical mind. Like, it can't be explained by modern science.
Absolutely. And the funny thing, everybody thought he was a developer for like the first year or two that he was an MVP, and he said, "No, I'm not a developer."
Something that still catches me by surprise is that Jonas doesn't have Jonas Rupp, the fantastic author behind the Fetch XML builder. He doesn't have deep developer knowledge, and his tools built in C# are some of the most used tools in the world when it comes to Dynamics.
So don't let the imposter syndrome or belief that you don't know enough stop you from getting started. Some people go too far the other way and put out things that are totally obvious and don't add anything. Make sure you're adding to the conversation, but you don't have to know 100% about everything before you start contributing.
Yeah, but that can be hard for people. So if the imposter syndrome is kind of like the reverse of another sin. I can't remember the name of it. Like you think you know everything because you don't know how much there is to know of it. Yeah, and if you don't know how far something goes, then of course you might think that you are the best in the world. And that can be an honest mistake, but you will look like all the others who are too, have too high a belief in their own abilities. I think an important thing is to ask for help or ask for input, or if you go to any of the, like for technical stuff, it's any of the technical pages and just ask people for input on what you made. And the golden rule of the internet is that if you go and say something that isn't true, people are going to shout you down and you will feel bad forever. But there's a lot of people out there who just want to help. So if you ask a question like, say, I think I've done something great here. Can you please take a look at it and tell me if I'm onto something or whatever?
Yeah, that's good. So how much feedback do you ask for, though?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can it go too far and start suggesting new features and then you delay releasing it? Or how do you know this is the right we have the right mix, it works well, this is the right mix of features to release for the first iteration of this?
So I like to think of myself as an MVP who releases MVPs. So minimal viable product. So I need something to transport me from A to B. So I build a skateboard, and then I release the skateboard, which sounds like an awesome quote from a movie. And then if somebody says, well, I would really like a better way to steer this, then okay, maybe I'll make a kick bike then and release the kick bike, and then a bicycle, and then a car, and the end, maybe a spaceship. But I try to make sure that I just release like a minimal viable product. And it's actually based on developer background that don't do premature optimization, and don't try to depending on what school you're from, don't like create interfaces and branch out your logic too much, because maybe sometime in the future you would like to do something more with it. Like, just push out something that actually works, which has, you want A to happen at point B, well, make that happen, then release it. Then reiterate and make something more.
Are you worried that somebody else is going
to
to come up with a similar idea and release it before you get yours out?
Not really. So what I'm most afraid of is that I'm copying somebody else and I haven't seen their blog post or heard about it before. And then I release something and someone says, well,
happened before.
This guy already did that, and you aren't. Yeah. It's so not really scared about that either, but that's like my worst scenario, that I thought I had an original idea and then it turned out that no, you're just one out of many. So
I mean, my question is, can I steal your idea for the movie script for the MVP spaceship?
Oh yeah.
That's a movie I want to see.
Yeah, the MVP spaceship. Yeah, so we needed to go to the moon, and he gave us released the skateboard.
I think it's not bad to build on other people's ideas if you do it with their permission as well. So if you see something out there where somebody posted a script sample that did something like this and gave you an idea to do it, my recommendation is, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do your thing. Just maybe talk to them and say, hey, I've got this idea. It's similar to what you have. And everybody that I've found is typically okay with doing that. They typically want, like, if you have a blog post that has a solution that is, and I've done this in the past where I've written a blog post and then I found somebody else's blog that was close and gone back and retroactively put a link in there to their blog post and said, here's something that's similar, or thank you to Jonas Rep for this post that helped in this.
Yeah. So, like, the number one thing you shouldn't do is steal other people's work. Like, that's just going to ruin your credibility forever. So don't do that. But don't be afraid to build on what other people have done. So worst case, you just link to what they did and like, this is a complete solution and I start from that point and this is what I did in addition. Or if they provide their code for free, then you can just say that, state in your blog post that, I got some of the code from this free repository or whatever. But nobody can, as long as it's public knowledge, then nobody can deny you to build on something somebody else made. So yeah, and also don't look too much on what others are doing. Like we have the MVP podcast. Well, I say we, it's actually you have the MVP podcast. So that's an excellent source for inspiration. It's not an excellent source for copying what other people are doing to become a successful person. So if you're stuck trying to see what other people are doing and trying to do the same thing, you're not really doing what you want to do, and you're probably not going to be really great at it either.
So don't copy their work, but also don't try to be them. Don't try to be Leon Tribe. There's only one Leon Tribe, and he's great at what he does. Bring your own voice and your own perspective to it.
And as I like to say, ask for help, but don't depend on it.
This has been ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. Follow Matthew on Twitter at @MCAnderson or on his blog, connectingthedata.com. Follow Joel Lindstrom on Twitter at Joel Lindstrom. ProdCast and the rest of the CRM Audio Network are available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and anywhere else fine podcasts are available. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.